Subscribing to this channel provides you regular access to professional advice on independent operators. If you want to support us, like, share, and turn on that notification.
Welcome to Making Your Miles Count Production, an educational program to all Canadian lease owner-operators with your host, Robert Scaper.
Welcome to the Make Your Miles Count podcast. I'm going to make a short little presentation here, short little few words to say. We're right in the middle of tax season. Tax season is not a fun time for most Canadians. Actually, a lot of people get income tax refunds, but owner-operators, man, we write out checks. That's all that we seem to have to do. And I'm not a big fan of taxes at all. I do not believe in doing things illegally, but I am an adamant anti-taxer. I've grown up. I was 60 years of age this last year, and I've seen taxes go up so amazingly, just skyrocket through the roof in almost every area. Canada pension went through the roof. All sorts of different taxes. When I was young, we didn't have GST. We didn't have a bunch of taxes. It's only gotten really bad. And never mind the carbon tax, and hopefully our politicians can do something about that. Seems like they're heading in the right direction of an anti-tax. But my biggest concern has to do with the young people of this country, young truck drivers for sure. How are they supposed to own a house when we are in unbelievable, topsy-turvy financial situation as we are as a country? I rarely go through the big numbers of our country, but realistically, we have a federal government, a provincial government, then we have city and municipal governments. Do you know that every single one of them are grossly in debt? We are somewhere between 1.4 and 1.6 trillion dollars in debt. That's just federal. Doesn't even talk about provincial yet, or city, or municipal. And we are in pressure on everything. One of the primary reasons that young people can't afford a house, can't make a decent living, isn't the trucking industry and the wages so much as it is taxes. We are the most unbelievably overtaxed country. And it's unbelievably burdensome. Being $1.6 trillion in debt, it's kind of hard to grapple in our minds what that actually means. So I'd like to give you a little bit of an illustration. Let's just say you make $70,000 a year in taxable income. That's what your T4 is. And let's say your house is paid for. That sounds good. So are your cars. So you're okay. But you do have to replace your cars, that kind of thing. But your house is paid for. The thing is, you can't ever sell your house. You can't consider your house to be something that you can actually sell. Using that as the basis, $70,000 as your income. What if you were $350,000 in credit card debt? What would you think? What's your mind on that? Well, first of all, how the heck did you get $350,000 in debt? And my goodness, with $70,000 of income, you'd think that you wouldn't have any problems with no debt. But realistically, the way our government spends, every year you add $15,000 or so to that credit card debt. So you get new credit cards all the time, Maybe it's APR 0% or very low interest rates or something like that. But those are the ratios that we're talking about. So that means, how do we get out of debt? Right now, if you look at the big numbers, $1.6 trillion in debt, between last year and this year, just the interest on that debt was $34 billion the year before last. Last year, or what just finished up, is now $52 billion. That's federal, just federal debt. Our interest can almost double in 1 year because the entire platform of debt that we have is all these short-term little loans. And very short-term means you can save a little bit on interest, but in the end, it's very it's very susceptible to the interest rate fluctuations. That's why a huge jump in percentage of interest rates from 1 year to the next. You know, when I was a kid, okay, so let's say 40, 50, 60 years ago, our national debt, when we did have a national debt, was long-term bonds. And so when we went into debt, it was just long-term bonds. And so when the interest rate went up and down, it didn't fluctuate that much, our interest rate. But over the last 20, 30 years, we've slowly moved away from long-term, and it's mostly short-term stuff. And that means that just from 1 year to the next, we can have a 50, 60% increase in our interest rates in our federal government. That makes a huge difference on our national budget. We just ballooned another 80 or so billion dollars in more debt, and which would be the equivalent of something along the lines of about $15,000 to our $350,000. That's ridiculous. If you look at what's going on with debt around the world, every free country has ballooned their debt. Not every, but 90 some odd percent has been just borrowing money. And that has really never been evident in our world before. You'd have to go all the way back to the Roman Empire when there was one currency, and they went into hyperinflation and stuff like that. But that was like 1,800, 2,000 years ago. So if you go in the world today, when it comes to debt, everybody is pretty much in the same category. If you look even 10 years ago, you could look at, say, one country, say Zimbabwe, and they would print money like crazy, and get into debt, and then they would have hyperinflation and stuff like that. You can tell when a crisis is coming, because when the whole world is bad, but this one is unbelievably horrible, like Zimbabwe, then you can create a currency difference. But when everybody is doing the same level of stupid, it, as a collective, it looks like, to some people anyway, as wise, which is ridiculous. But that's our topsy-turvy world right now. So what do you do? I don't want to say this to scare anyone, because realistically it doesn't help anything just to be fearful. But what would you do when your country, and for that matter the world, is heading towards a currency crisis? And that may happen 2 years, 20, 30, 40 years, who knows? But bottom line is we have to protect our assets. And there's a few steps that are guaranteed the best steps you could possibly have when it comes to a global currency crisis or a debt crisis from our country or neighboring countries, or sort of a domino effect from other countries. If, for instance, our neighbors to the south get into serious financial trouble, that's a huge domino, and we're going to fall if they fall. So when the United States goes, so do we. But realistically, how do you protect yourself? Well, number one is you get out of credit card debt. That's the first thing, because that's the first thing that gives you the most vulnerability. Second thing, get out of your any type of vehicle debt, whether it's a personal vehicle, whether it's your highway tractor. Get out of debt, and if at all possible, stay out of debt with highway tractor truck. Now, it's a little bit different with a highway tractor because you can have fixed rates over 4, 6, 8 years or something like that, but and you're not going to be caught into some hyperinflation, inflationary situation or interest situation. So, but realistically, getting out of debt is always the number one best thing for you to do. Finally, or second final, should I say, is getting out of your personal mortgage debt. I can't give you an exact, nobody can give you an exact date as to when a crisis would happen. But if we know that something is going to happen because the numbers are just that bad, just think about it. If you have $350,000 worth of credit card debt, how long would it take you to get out of debt? Well, you say if you have $70,000, you say, oh, okay, well, maybe you can do it in 6 or 8 or 10 years. But if the annual budget is at $85,000, well, you can only cut so much, and you don't have much breathing room anymore for that. So you have to, in order for you to plug down $350,000 worth of debt, that means you would need to plow down at least $20,000 a year. It would take you 5 years to do $100,000, and 15, 18 years to do $350,000. Now, if you think, okay, well, we got 18 years worth of debt, that's fine, and we can do it. But first of all, you have to have people in Ottawa that are determined to pay down the equivalent of, say, $20,000 in debt per year for the next 18 years. When it comes to debt and your personal mortgage, there is something about Canada that is actually quite different than that it is from the United States. In the United States, when they get, say, a 15-year mortgage, they negotiate a percentage, and they make the same payment over 15 years. In Canada, you can't get a 15-year mortgage anymore. You can only get about a 5-year mortgage, sometimes even 3-year mortgage. And what that means is everybody says, oh no, I got a 20-year mortgage, or a 25, or even a 30-year mortgage. Of course I got a 30-year mortgage. No, you renegotiate every 3 to 5 years, usually about 5 years. And that means that the interest rate is going to change for you on that 5th year. Everybody hopes it's going to go down, but realistically, nobody knows. And when you don't know something, you have to always prepare for the worst. And that's something about Canada that we really have to take into mind. The banks in Canada have made it, I shouldn't say illegal, but it's not offered to have something longer than a 5-year mortgage. And yes, it's amortized over 20, 30 years or something like that. But that particular aspect of financing is something that the banks have purposely done. They don't want to take on the risk of long-term mortgages. And that's not fair, in my opinion. That's something that comes directly because of the, what I would call it's an oligopoly of banks. The 6 or 7 banks in Canada, they're in relationship with one another, even though they cannot legally communicate. They work together. If one does one thing, then bang, the other does another thing. It's a little bit like if you have bratty kids, and one bratty kid does something, then all the other kids goes, hey, if he gets away with that, I can get away with that too. So it's that's how it operates in an oligopoly. There's no direct communication, but there's absolutely, they keep an eye on each other, and everybody does it. I remember years ago, this when we had actually very reasonable bank charges, like annual or monthly charges for a checking account or something like that. It's very realistic, it was $5 or $8, or I think $10 at the most or something. And all of a sudden, one bank bumps it up to 20, and the other one bumps it up, and within a few months, everybody bumped it up, and then they bumped it up from 20 to 25, and then to 30, and it doubled, even tripled, over a very short period of time. And that's because we have an oligopoly. The banks look at each other, say, okay, if he can do that, we can do that. We're all about the same, and that's what it ends up happening. It's not It's not fair. Well, I shouldn't say fair. It's not something that's beneficial to us, but we're a country, we have to sort of live with the institutions that provide us the financial resources, I guess. Well, the way our government works is every 5 to 15 years we go far left, and then every 5 to 15 we go far right, and then far left, and one or sometimes even both go nutsy cuckoo with their spending, and we go further into debt and not anything better. The only alternative for this scenario in our country, or any country for that matter, is inflation. Interest rates high, and when interest rates bump up like they have in the last little while, that just means that it's eating away at our wealth that we have created. It's very dangerous. And the only way to protect yourself from that is to get out of debt. And we have hundreds and hundreds of clients, and I just want to encourage each one of our clients and everybody to say, look, before we start pounding away at Ottawa to stop the deficits, I think what we should do is say, listen, let's roll up our own sleeves and get our financial house in order first. If we can get out of debt and start saving, basically what happens in Ottawa, generally speaking, is they want to get reelected, and they say if the country is going to be more responsible, we better be more responsible too. That's the general position that I have, or I hope is a normal position to have. So I just want to encourage everybody to rethink what their priorities are, and say, you know what, think for your retirement, think for your kids, and let's do something financially sound this next year or 2 or 5. And if that means selling a house and downsizing, then maybe that's the best thing to do to reduce the level of stress, anxiety, and conflict in our lives. It's much more comforting to live in an old shack with no financial difficulties than it is to live in a huge mansion and have to wake up to high levels of stress every day. That's my thoughts today. I hope I can encourage you into the goals of financial wealth. Have a good trip.
Thanks for stopping by Making Your Miles Count. For further Making Your Miles Count productions, call us at 877-987-9787 or download us at makingyourmilescount.com.